Okay. So I think probably everybody here knows, but just by way of introduction, so our guest speaker for this evening is Jen Gale, an author and podcaster. Um, some of you may have heard of her before, partly because we previously recommended both her books and podcast as part of Corn Exchange, which is our website, Jen. So we're big fans. Um, the podcast and website both go under the name Sustainable-ish, which I'm sure Jen will explain the reason why. I feel like this is a really, really good time to have you as a speaker because this is our last meeting this year. We won't have one in December. And obviously, this is a time of year when for most of us, it's like extra hard to resist thinking we need to treat ourselves and other people to all the shiny stuff that's in the shops. And I'm hoping you can help us resist that temptation. Um, I, I'm not expecting too much, but um, I will hand over to you, Jen, and welcome to Climate Action West Northamptonshire.
Oh, thank you very much, everyone. Okay, I have got some slides, and I was just saying to Jane, the original brief was 20 minutes, and I sort of put some slides together this afternoon and went, oh, it's quite a lot of slides for 20 minutes. So I'll probably just talk quicker and quicker, and we'll see how much we can squeeze in before everybody kind of switches off.
Yeah.
So let me just share my screen. And the sort of vague kind of topic suggested was the idea about, how can individuals make a difference? So I sort of switched that and phrased it, can I make a difference? Short answer, absolutely yes, of course you can. But that doesn't take 20 minutes to say that. So we'll dive into that in much more depth. Just very briefly, Jane has already done a little bit of an intro. So my background is I used to be a vet. I worked in small animal practice, and whilst I was still in practice and had two very small children, I randomly decided it would be quite a fun challenge to spend a year buying nothing new. So that was September 2012 we started that, and that was my air quotes eco-epiphany, and I completely stole that term from somebody else and I really like it. That was my kind of oh, this is really quite a big issue, and this is something that A, I should be worried about, and B, can do something about. And I think we're maybe at a stage at the moment where, awareness around the climate crisis is probably as high as it's ever been, and lots of people are going, oh, that's a really big issue. Somebody ought to do something about that. And I think we need to get much better at helping people to appreciate the fact that they are somebody and that we can all do something about this. So I kept a blog for that year, and for some reason set myself for the additional challenge of posting on that blog every single day for the year, and that was much harder of a challenge than buying nothing new, as it turned out. And really kind of came out of that year just not only having sort of changed my shopping habits and where I shopped and how much I bought and all those sorts of things, but really with this recognition that my actions do make a difference. And even if it's just making a difference to us and our little household and our family and the things that we do and the money that we spend and the things that we bring into our house, it absolutely makes a difference. And then I guess this growing awareness that whatever we do as air quotes just one person, as just one family, creates ripples whether we see them or not. So other people will see us doing things. We will inevitably have conversations about the things that we're doing and buying and all those sorts of things, and that does have a knock-on impact. And we're sort of there's an increasing body of science actually that sort of behind this idea of sort of social tipping points. So we might all be a little bit familiar with the idea of climate tipping points as really sort of negative things that we want to avoid within climate systems. But there is this idea of sort of positive tipping points, and social tipping points is one of them. So it's around this idea of social norms, and apparently we need about 25% of a population doing something differently in order for that to become the new social norm. So and that's making these changes, being seen to be making these changes, talking about them, talking about some of the co-benefits that come with them in terms of maybe that's money saved or feeling a bit healthier or all those kinds of things. So and I think we need to get much better as a sort of climate space at telling this story of some of the sort of positive benefits that come with making more sustainable lifestyle choices. So as Jane said, I've I've been lucky enough to have a couple of books published. I have a podcast. I'm a carbon literacy trainer, and I do a reasonable amount of speaking as well. Do quite a lot of sort of corporate-y lunch and learn type sessions, so things like this. And the whole idea of sustainable-ish is that it's all about imperfect action, because I think sometimes the idea, if we think, oh, I want to be a bit greener, I want to be a bit more sustainable, oh, but I can't give up flying because I've got family who live abroad, and I don't really want to go vegan, and I have to drive my car because I live quite rurally. Oh, do you know what? I can't do anything. And actually, we can all do something. You know, yes, there are the sort of pinnacle green things we can do, but there are also lots of things on all of those scales, many different shades of green, and we can all have a go at something. And I often think that first step can be the hardest. So if we can make that first step as accessible as possible, if we can be as welcoming as possible to people into this space, you know, I always talk about the idea of sort of trying to leave the big green batty sticks at the door. I think especially online, there is a tendency for people to sort of bash down other people when they come and share something that they've done, because in our eyes, maybe they haven't done it perfectly or they haven't done it the right way. And I think we really need to get over that and really encourage people to come and just have a go, get things wrong, and keep moving in the right direction. So just really quickly, we've got like 3 slides, I think, on the problem. I know that you guys are already on board and engaged, and you're probably already all over this, but it never hurts. We can't say this enough, can we? Let's have a yes or a no in the chat if you have seen this image before. It's one of my favorites. So we can find the chat. So Claire, yes. Anyone else? Give us a yes or a no. Emmy, yes. Jane, yes. Okay, we've got quite a few yeses. Anybody feel brave enough to volunteer to explain to us what this image is? Anybody brave enough, or I'll pick on somebody. Does anybody want to unmute and share?
Oh, I think Lee has put the answer into the chat. I don't know if you want to
go on then, Lee. Do you fancy having it
unmuting
and explaining to? Sounds like everybody's already all over it, but let's have a go.
Yeah, it's I don't know what year it starts, but it was the temperature point for each year, and it's getting hotter and hotter.
Yeah, brilliant. So these are called the warming stripes. They're sometimes called the climate stripes. They were created by Ed Hawkins, who's a professor at Reading University. And what he's done is he's given every year a stripe and a colour, depending on whether it was warmer or cooler than the average. So he started about 1850. Answers in the chat. Why do we think he started at 1850? Why did he pick 1850 as a starting point? What do we think? See how quickly people can type. Yeah, bang on, Lee. Industrial revolution. So as Claire said, this is when we sort of really, you know, dived in with full-on enthusiasm into burning fossil fuels and chucking all greenhouse gases, you know, starting to really chuck greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere. Jane, it's also, yeah, when some clever type invented like proper thermometers and we started getting really sort of decent measurements. But I think probably the main reason is that it really shows the impact really of the Industrial Revolution. When we're thinking about what we can do as individuals, one of the things that we can do is talk about this to other people. And this is a brilliant graphic as a comms tool, as a conversation starter. So, you know, have a little think and maybe share some ideas in the chat. What somebody's already said, they've seen it knitted as a scarf. Like, are there other ways that you've seen it being used, or what ways could you use it, you know, as you as an individual, or how might you as a group be able to use this as a bit of a comms tool? Claire, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, just very quickly, have you got a really simple explanation for what the average is? So obviously the white stripes are the average, but when is that average taken from? Because I see that most
I think it's the 50-year period. Sort of like the 1800 to 1850. So they sort of take, you know, the 50-year period prior to that, and work out the average of that 50-year period, and then use that as the average. Yeah, and then going forward. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. We've already had knitted scarves. I know people who use this as their Zoom or their Teams background, so that every time they're on a work call, inevitably someone goes, oh, I like your background, what's that? And then you have this lovely, gentle climate conversation. I don't know if anyone's seen Reading Football Club have got this as part of their strip on their sleeves. And that's amazing, because what that meant was that when Reading played Manchester United, the commentators started having a conversation about the strip and the stripes and what they represented on a Saturday afternoon on ITV in front of millions of people who we might not normally associate with climate action. So there are loads of really, I think, clever ways. It's on some buses in Reading. I've seen primary schools that have got like it on a wall, sort of outside the school, all that sort of thing. So you know, have a little think about, are there any ways that you might be able to use this as a comms tool, either individually or as a group, as a way of just kicking off some gentle climate conversations. Okay, next one. Anyone seen this one? Give us a yes or a no in the chat. So Claire, yes. Bryony, no. Jane, yes. Harry, no. Emmy, no. So this one isn't quite as widely sort of known or as widely seen. Claire or Jane, do you fancy, you're like regretting putting yes now, do you fancy having a go at explaining this one for us?
So I think this is biodiversity stripes.
Yeah.
So this is showing the decline of biodiversity in the UK. I think is it?
I think these are the
worldwide.
global stripes,
Is it worldwide? Yeah. And I'm not sure whether it's over the same period or not. I think it's a slightly different period, maybe, but similar thing. And again, terrifying.
Yeah. So these, exactly as Jan said, these are the biodiversity stripes. This time created by another professor, Miles Richardson at Derby University. In a response to the fact that apparently climate gets, although in the climate space we might think climate doesn't get enough media coverage, even, you know, accepting that, climate gets 8 times more media coverage than biodiversity loss. And biodiversity loss kind of underpins everything. So climate change is, there's 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss. Climate change is one of them. So there's other things like pollution and invasive species, and I can't remember the others off the top of my head. But you know, without biodiversity is like just the sheer abundance and different types of animals, plants, fungi, all these sorts of things that exist on Earth. And we are absolutely reliant on them for air, water, soil, pollinators, food, you know, all these sorts of things. And it's very, I think we've become very detached from nature. We're very, it's very easy to assume like we don't need it, but we are absolutely 100% reliant on it. So these stripes show the decline in global biodiversity since 1970, I think. In the chat, I don't know if anybody knows or have a guess, have your best guess. What percentage decline have we seen globally in biodiversity since 1970? So Emmy's gone 40. Let's see if we've got any other guesses coming in. Bryony, 60. Harry's gone 80, so we've got 40, 60, 80. It's 69, a 69% decline in global biodiversity since 1970. So that's in, you know, in or thereabouts, lots of our lifetimes. And we can kind of, and it's kind of happened without us noticing, but when we stop and think about it, maybe we think, oh, I remember as a child going on holiday and on a long car journey and there being loads of bug splats on the windscreen, and now there aren't really. And that's like a very sort of visible way of recognizing certainly decline in sort of flying pollinators and things like that. So biodiversity, I think, needs a lot more conversations, a lot more talking about it. The good thing is that, you know, a lot of the actions that we can take to reduce emissions and to help tackle climate change are also really positive for biodiversity as well. So often these things can be a win-win. And unfortunately, it's not just climate change and biodiversity. There are loads of other things. And this is just some ideas. You know, this isn't just a complete list, but it is this sort of real jigsaw of all these different issues, separate and overlapping, that are really kind of impacting on the planet and that we need to be thinking about and taking action on. Probably makes us all feel a little bit like this, doesn't it? It's incredibly overwhelming as individuals, as air quotes, just one person, to think, well, what can we do about these huge, enormous issues that are happening? So in terms of what does need to happen, what do we need to do? So this is from the latest IPCC report, and the scientists are telling us that in order to limit warming to around 1.5 degrees, and just a point on that as well, I think we're quite guilty again in the climate space. We talk about 1.5 degrees, we talk about 2 degrees of warming without putting that into context for people. And I think I can absolutely understand why some people are like, what are you on about? Like, why are you getting your knickers in a knot? 1.5 degrees is absolutely nothing. I couldn't tell you if my cup of tea was 89 or 90 degrees. So I always try and make a point when I do my talks, and I, you know, if I mention 1.5 degrees or I mention 2 degrees, there's a brilliant analogy that Catherine Hayhoe uses, and she's an amazing climate scientist. She's also a wonderful climate communicator, and she talks about the analogy of the human body. So if we had a temperature of 1.5 degrees above normal, we would feel pretty ropey, we'd have a headache, we'd feel pretty achy, like we would know that something was wrong. And certainly if our temperature was consistently above 1.5 degrees and not coming down, we probably start to experience some problems with some of our body systems, you know, starting to, you know, all these clever feedback loops that exist to keep our temperature nice and steady and stable start to break down. And that's the situation we're at with the planet. So although 1.5 degrees doesn't sound like a huge amount, when we think about it in the context of our bodies, that can often help people to sort of realize, like, oh, that's why you're making such a big deal about something that sounds like a little number. So really, we, you know, the goal is that we want to try and limit warming to around 1.5 degrees. And so to do that, we need global greenhouse gas emissions to peak before when? When do we think? Have a go in there, have your pop your answers in the chat. When do we think the scientists are telling us that global greenhouse gas emissions need to peak by? Now. Yeah, pretty much, Lee. We are absolutely running out of time. Emmy, absolutely bang on, 2025. So we need emissions to peak before 2025 at the latest, and to be reduced by what percentage do we think by the end of this decade? What percentage reduction do we need to see in greenhouse gas emissions by the end of this decade? Have a guess in the chat. There may be some furious Googling going on. Jane, 50, yeah, so that's 43%, but I tend to do some bad maths and I round that up to 50%. So essentially we need to halve our greenhouse emissions between now and 2030. That's you and me halving our carbon footprints. That's, you know, any organisations we're involved with, halving those. That's us as a country, as the UK, and globally, you know, as a society, we need to halve our emissions. Important thing to note with that is that we absolutely have all the technology that we need to make this happen. We don't have all the technology we need to get to net zero by to completely decarbonize all of our industry and those sorts and agriculture and all those sorts of things. But we have all the technology we need to do this, to halve emissions by 2030. And that should be every organization's near-term, sort of near to medium-term goal, is to halve their emissions by the end of this decade. What we're lacking at the moment is the two small things: the political will and the international cooperation. But there is so much action that we can take without having to wait for politics and politicians and governments to catch up with us. There's a huge amount that we can do as individuals, as communities, as organizations. And in terms of biodiversity, so we've probably all heard of the climate COPs that happen. So COP28 is coming up in a week or two's time. But there are also lots of other COPs that happen, including a biodiversity COP. So there was, I think it was COP15 for biodiversity last year in Montreal. And a framework came out of that with a recommendation that we need to preserve a percentage of land and sea for nature by a date. So what do we think? What percentage of land and sea do we need to be preserved for nature? And when do we need to do that by? Does anybody know? Bang on, Claire. Well done. 30% of land and sea to be preserved for nature by 2030. So 30 by 30 is that quite nice sort of thing to think about. So when we're thinking about this and about biodiversity, how can I preserve 30% of my garden for nature? How can, if we've got a church in the village, if we've got school fields in the village, how can we start to come up with a plan that means that we're setting aside 30% of those for rewilding projects, for wildflowers, putting in ponds, all those sorts of things? Because it's really easy to kind of go, oh yes, 30% by 2030, and then, oh gosh, someone's got a job to do there. Well, how can we just keep bringing these back to us and to our communities and the things that we can do? So we know what we've got to do. this is going to involve massive action by all of us. We absolutely need businesses to take action. We need governments to take action, and we have a huge role to play as individuals. The whole debate around sort of individual change versus system change, I feel is, I don't know, like we need everything at the moment. We need individual change and we need system change, and individual changes are often what lead to system changes. So when enough individuals within a system say, not going to do this anymore, not playing this game, come on, we need to do something different, that's when we see systems change. Also important to remember that businesses and governments at all levels are made up of individuals. So that 25% tipping point, if we can reach those 25% tipping points, if we can move towards those social norms in businesses, in governments, in parish councils, that's when we start to see the systems change that we really need as well. So I've got a little Menti poll, and I'm always slightly nervous about these because I'm never hugely trusting of the tech. If you've got a phone, you might be able to do the QR code scan thing with your camera, and that should take you to the correct place. If not, if you go to on your device to menti.com and use the code 68383935, there's a little question on there. What action do you think is the most effective thing that we can do as individuals to tackle climate change? And there's 8, I think, options for you. So recycle, is it working? Claire's looking confused. It is working, fab. So cast your vote. Recycle as much as possible. Buy energy only from renewable sources. Replace a typical car with an EV or hybrid. Use low energy light bulbs. Hang dry clothes instead of tumble drying. Avoid one long distance flight, not having a car, or eating a plant-based diet. What do you think is the most effective action that individuals can take to tackle climate change? God, I've got some votes coming in. It's always a relief when the votes start coming in and the tech has worked. So no judgment, no, we're all here, best guesses, all those kinds of things. So just have a go and pop down what you think. So we've got 2, 4, 6. Just give it another few seconds in case anybody else wants to vote. Okie dokes. So this is from some research done by Ipsos, who are a sort of polling organization, I think, and they asked this question, to people in different countries, and then have got global results and all those sorts of things. So these are the answers, if you like. So living car free is the most impactful thing we can do in terms of reducing our carbon footprint. Then avoiding one transatlantic flight, buying renewable energy, switching to an EV, and plant-based diet. Those are all like big impact actions. And then the sort of lower end of the scale, we've got the not using your tumble dryer, recycling as much as possible, and switching to LED light bulbs. So you guys were pretty good. You all picked like the high impact actions. This gets really interesting when we see the results for the general public, because 59% of the general public are under the, their understanding is that recycling as much as possible is the most impactful thing we can do to tackle the climate crisis. And this isn't I can't think of the word. This isn't to sort of point fingers and laugh at anybody and go, oh, you absolute morons, why would you think that? This is to say, like, I absolutely understand why people think this, because basically we've spent the last 20 or 30 years telling people that the best thing they can do to help the environment is to recycle. So I just think that sometimes we need to maybe gently help people to understand, what are the high impact actions and what are the low impact actions, because we've all got limited time, headspace, energy, all those sorts of things. So when we are trying to think about where should we be focusing that limited time, space, time, headspace, finances, all those sorts of things, really trying to encourage people to think about those big impact actions can be really, really important. And remember that, remember that sustainable-ish, none of them have to be all or nothing. So it isn't not everybody has to go to a 100% vegan diet. It can be meat-free Monday as your starting point, and moving on from there. But I just wanted to sort of show you this because I just thought it was quite interesting research and quite interesting way of just gently sort of challenging people's perceptions about what can be, what are high impact actions. But I thought, coming to speak to you guys who are probably, you're already engaged, you're already on board, probably the last thing you want is, or the last thing that would be helpful is to me to come and tell you to take fewer flights and to drive your car less and to eat more plant-based foods. Like, we all know those things are what we need to do. I think sometimes the actually doing them can be the difficult thing. But I thought this is Catherine Hayhoe, who I mentioned earlier. This is a tweet that she, I don't know what we're supposed to call them now, X, that she shared on Twitter. And I thought it was really interesting because she said, you know, these are the things that she said. If you're worried about climate change and want to make a difference, and this list of stuff. And I think traditionally what we have focused on when we think about individual climate action is reduce your footprint. Not even reduce your footprint and amplify it by talking about it, but reduce your footprint. Again, as well as the kind of recycling, the narrative is also like, as individuals, all we can do is focus on our own carbon footprints and reducing our own carbon footprints. Actually, we can do so much more than that. And we've kind of forgotten about, or not even thought about, all of these other things that we can do alongside reducing our footprint that help to amplify that and really help us to sort of step into the power that we have as individuals. So I'm going to go through, actually, rather than, you know, things we can do to reduce our footprint, I'm going to go through these top, what are they, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, thinking about the things that we can do to sort of this idea that some of you might have heard of, or like growing our climate shadow. So we want to shrink our carbon footprints, but we want to grow our climate shadows. And that's all of these things that we do that have a really positive impact, but that wouldn't be a tick box on a carbon footprint calculator. So the conversations that we have, all those kinds of things. So we'll start off with start a conversation. I've got a little video. It's about 3 minutes. I'm aware I've already been rattling on for like 20 minutes. Do you want to watch the video? I think it's really useful. You guys up for that? Yeah?
I'm happy with that.
Fab. So this is a video about how to have a climate conversation that completely transformed my thoughts around what a climate conversation is. So I'd really love to hear your thoughts after we've watched this.
Talking about climate change can be tough. I mean, it's not like something you can just casually bring up in conversation, but it's such a big, important topic. We can't just ignore it. And while you can't fix climate change all by yourself, you do have the power to affect the people in your life. So let's talk more about climate change. Here's how. First, think about all the things you want to say about climate change, and don't say them. Really. You see, if you just start going off on how bad climate change is, people are probably going to shut down. They may feel attacked and put up their guard. It doesn't matter how eloquent your words are. If the other person's not listening, there's no point. So here's the secret to talking about climate change. Listen. Listen to the other person. I know it sounds weird, but it's the most important part. You may think the goal is to convince the other person of your perspective, but that's going about it all wrong. The goal is just to have an actual conversation, and that only happens when people listen. So how do you start? First of all, don't ambush people. Get permission first. If they're busy, no need to force it. Just try again another time. Distractions make talking hard, so it's okay to ask to shut devices off. Once you have their attention, start with a question about climate change. Remember to make it about them, not you. Ask about their thoughts and their perspective. When they start speaking, you have one job: just listen. Resist any urge to respond right away. And whatever you do, don't interrupt. This might be the hardest part, especially if you have strong feelings or if the other person is saying something that you disagree with. But trust me on this. Just listen and be open to what they're saying. Now, if the other person doesn't say much, that doesn't mean you can go, okay, they're done, my turn. It's not your turn until you learn something about the other person. So encourage them to say more by asking follow-up questions. Ask about personal experiences. No need to go into science or politics. Reflect back what you hear them say. Repeating and referring to their words lets them know that you are listening, that you care about their point of view. This makes them feel valued and safe. When you earn their trust, they will be more willing to open up and listen to you. So after they've shared their perspective, then ask if you can tell them about yours. Okay, now it's your turn. What will you say? Remember, the point is not to convince the other person of anything. If you try to do that, they may become defensive and stop listening. Just share what you personally think about climate change. You may not be a climate expert, but you are the expert on yourself. So tell your story. When did you start caring about climate change? What worries you the most? After you're done talking, ask what they think. Bring it back to them. And you guessed it, listen. That's what a conversation is, a two-way exchange of ideas. Go back and forth for as long as it feels right. Learn from one another. At the end, thank them for talking and say what you learned from them. This is important. Ending on a positive note makes it more likely that this conversation will happen again. You see, one little chat may not change anyone's life, but it opens the door to more climate conversations in the future. And that's how you build trust, get others caring about climate change, and make a long-term impact. You may be surprised how much you learn in the process too. So, what are you waiting for? Talk to someone about climate change. It may be one of the most important things you do.
What do you think? That, like, if anyone's done any kind of coaching or management training, or the active listening thing will probably be something that you've come across before. You know, I think I still do, even, you know, having watched this video. I use this video in my carbon literacy training, so I probably watch it once a week. But I still have this, like, oh my God, like, if I'm going to have a climate conversation with somebody, I've got 3 minutes and I've got to persuade them that it's a problem and then tell them 5 things that they can go away and do and wrap it all up nice and neatly in a bow. Like, that's not a conversation, is it? So it's like, how can we, really hard not to interrupt, isn't it? That sitting on your hands. And I think also, like, just be really kind with ourselves. Like, if we're trying this new approach to climate conversations and it goes wrong, that's fine. This is a skill that we're learning. So that doesn't mean like, oh my God, I can't do it, I'm rubbish, I can never have another climate conversation. Let's have a little think about where that went wrong, what we could have done a little bit differently, and have another go. So one of the things I really want to encourage you all to do is to go away and to have a climate conversation with somebody. That could be your partner, you know, your other half. That could be your kids. That could be somebody at work. That could be the person that you walk the dog with. And just asking that question, how do you feel about climate change, can just be a really nice, gentle in. It's not loaded. There's no, you know, agenda. Well, there is an agenda there, but like, you know, to just asking that question and genuinely listening to what other people say can be a really nice, gentle in. So I would love you to share in the chat who you might be able to have a climate conversation with, and what your opening line might be, and when you're going to do it as well, because that all makes it much more likely that you're going to do it. Because otherwise I go away and have a climate conversation and you'll go, oh yes, of course I will, and then it never happens. But if I make you think about who you're going to have it with, when you're going to do it, and what you're going to say, that makes it much, much more likely that it's going to happen. So please do share in the chat, have a little think about that and share in the chat. So join a climate action group is the next one. Tick, you guys have already done that. Amazing, well done. Have a little think about where else might you, you know, obviously everybody needs other things to be doing, but, you know, is there already a sustainability team at your workplace? Is there an eco group at your kids' school? Is there, so, you know, are there other places where, in addition to the amazing stuff that you guys are doing here, are there other places where you might be able to, you know, because I think our definition of a climate action group is like, oh my God, I'm going to go and they're going to make me glue myself to something. Like that is one version of a climate action group. Another version is what you guys are doing. Another version is a repair cafe. Another version is a litter picking group. Like, these are all, you know, climate action is a massive spectrum, and activism is a massive spectrum. Trying to find where you sit on that spectrum and something that you enjoy doing, I think is really, really useful. In terms of making your, Catherine's put dollars, but your pounds count. So this is an area, I think, where we don't talk about it quite as much in terms of a really, really impactful climate action. So I don't know if anybody's done anything around their money, around their current accounts, around their pensions, but have a little look now if you fancy it. Go to bank.green and have a little look. And there, what I think from memory, there's a sort of drop down box on there, and you can find your bank on there, and it will tell you how well or otherwise they perform when it comes to investing in fossil fuels. So if you find it and you're happy to share, come and share in the chat. Because depressingly, most of the high street banks in the UK are heavily investing in fossil fuels. So we can be making all the changes that we like in terms of being really careful with our consumption and what we're buying, and yet our money, you know, when it's sat in our current accounts, and certainly when it's in savings and ISAs and in pensions, might be working completely counter to what we're doing, and might be almost effectively cancelling out what we're doing. So have a little look. I don't know if anybody wants to share. their results on there. And then on the website, it will also then give you ideas of who you might want to switch to. So Triodos are probably the market leader here in the UK, but Starling do very well if you're looking for a sort of online option. Nationwide do quite well because they're a building society rather than a bank, and they're set up slightly differently. So there are options. Switching bank accounts is one of those things that we put off because it feels really hard. And in the UK, where apparently, well, I heard this and I haven't been able to fact check it, but somebody told me that we're more likely to end a relationship with a person than we are to end our relationship with our bank. We are so wedded to our banks. But actually, it's not as hard as we kind of build it up in our heads to be. They all have direct debit guarantees. So, you know, thinking about if you've already switched, how can you share this information and get one other person to switch? You know, whether you share that on your social media, whether you share it with a friend, whether you share it with colleagues. Is it a little campaign you can do as a group in terms of getting people in your area to look at their bank and to look also at their pensions as well? So this is a great organisation called Make My Money Matter, who are doing loads of work around getting pension companies to divest. And again, you can go on the website and there's petition, template letters you can send off. There's petitions. There's it will tell you how well or otherwise your pension company does. One of the things that you can do is switch your pension. So switching your whole pension is a bit of a pain in the bum, but what you might be able to do is if you know who your pension is with, you might be able to switch to their sustainable fund within that same pension group, if that makes sense. And again, this is something to ask of your HR manager. This is something to ask at work. Like, does anybody know who our pensions are with? Could we have a think about, whether we could switch? Is this something that, the leadership team are happy to have a little look at? So that's a hugely impactful thing to do. There are trillions of pounds in pension pots all sat there, and a lot of that being invested in fossil fuels. So moving our pension, moving our bank account has none of the sort of Instagrammable appeal of, sharing our reusable coffee cup, but is actually a hugely impactful thing to do. So again, if you're looking for big impact actions, these are a couple of them. If we move on to spark ideas at work and school, I've already shared, you could take this pension information into your workplace, but some other ideas, some littler things, especially thinking about Christmas coming up. So thinking about Christmas, like if you've got kids of school age, especially if they're at primary school, there seemed to be, certainly when mine were at primary school, a pressure that every child gives every other child in their class a Christmas card. So if you've got 30 kids in a class, that's suddenly 280 Christmas cards and envelopes. If there's 7 classes in the school, that works out, I think it's about 6,000 cards and envelopes. That's a lot, So could you, it's probably not too late to do it now, get in touch with the school, or if you've got a parents WhatsApp group, say, look, guys, can we not do this year? Because, money's a bit tight. It's a pain in the bum trying to persuade my child to write 30 cards because they hate it. And also, I'm just really worried that this all adds up to an awful lot of trees and an awful lot of impact. So there are, you could say, can each child just do, like, maybe make a lovely card and to the whole class, and the teacher finds some way of displaying it or something like that. That can be a nice little way of sparking some conversation, sparking some ideas at school. Other Christmas jumper swap, something you could do at school, something you could do as a community, something you can do in your workplace relatively easily, relatively low effort. It might not take off straight away, but it's something that you can build on year as well. So that might be something. And then this last picture is from Hubbub, who are an environmental charity with some great campaigns. And they're trying to promote this idea of, like, if you're doing an office Secret Santa, can you put some boundaries around it and say, can we do it secondhand? Can we just say that everybody has to give something edible or pass on a book that they've loved and think somebody else would like? Because £280 million was spent on office Secret Santa gifts last year. And a lot of those are completely unwanted and may well end up in landfill. So, thinking about some little things that you might be able to do at school or work with Christmas coming up. And then in terms of bigger things, certainly at work, thinking about carbon literacy training. So if anybody's interested in that, it's 8 hours worth of training. and people get a certificate at the end of it, and it's all very geared to the organisation and the role and getting people to think about the changes that they can make. So very happy to chat if people want to ask any more information about that. The Make My Money Matter campaign. If you've got kids of school age, there's a brilliant project called Solar for Schools, where you can go on the website and you can put your school's postcode in, and it comes up with a Google Earth thing of the school. It tells you what roughly an idea of the solar capacity of that school, and then points you in the idea of like where you might be, how much it might cost and where you might be able to get some funding or some loans or all those sorts of things for it. So those are just some ideas for some of the things that you might be able to do at school or work. And the last one we've got here is holding politicians accountable. So this, there was a study done in 2017 that asked MPs why they weren't taking more action, more climate action. And the vast majority of them said it's because they weren't hearing from their constituents that it was an issue for them. There was I was on a presentation earlier on this week, and it was might have been from Ipsos, but it was from a big polling body, and climate is still just about in the top 10 of people's sort of concerns, but it's really slipped down to sort of 7 or 8. So we need to let politicians know, especially with an election coming up, that this is something we're concerned about, that we'll be voting along those lines, that we really want to see climate action being taken. So again, these are just a few organisations that can help with that. I don't know if you guys have had any experience with any of them. Hope for the Future are brilliant. You can get in touch. They run fairly regular webinars about how to engage with your politicians around climate action, and how to engage constructively as well, rather than just write lots of angry letters and tweet them. They will also help you sort of, on a sort of one-to-one thing. If you say, this is my MP, this is the thing that I'm concerned about, they will help you to work out the best way to approach them. They'll support you if you want to go and meet them face to face, all those sorts of things. So they're a brilliant organisation. Greenpeace are doing a campaign in the run up to the election called Project Climate Vote, getting people, I think, sort of essentially knocking on doors, talking to people about climate, asking them to use their vote to vote along lines of climate. And then Client Earth are a great organisation who are a bunch, I think is the collective term for lawyers. They're lawyers who basically sue governments, sue fossil fuel companies, to try and go down the legal route of forcing them to take more ambitious climate action. So if you've got, a few quid to spare and you're looking for a climate charity, we might not think of them as a traditional climate charity, but they are an excellent organisation to support in terms of the impact that they're having. And just last slide, guys. I'm sorry, I've rattled on for so long. This is, I don't know if you guys have heard of this sort of concept of ikigai. It's a Japanese concept in terms of sort of like finding, what it is you're supposed to do with your life. And somebody, Ayana Elizabeth Johnson has made a version of this, a sort of climate ikigai, if you like. So when we're thinking about what can I do as an individual, we know what we already know, like we said, all the things we can do to be reducing our footprint. Our impact as an individual becomes so much more when we join up with other people and we start to think about how we as individuals can come together to collective action. So really thinking about, because we all know the risks of burnout when we're doing all this kind of stuff, like what is it that brings you joy? Because if we're going to do this work, we might as well make sure that it's something that we enjoy doing and that, brings something extra to our life. What are you good at? So, is there a climate campaign or organization? If you're really good at social media, or you're really good at spreadsheets, or you're really good at, I don't know what, like, what are the things that you are good at? Because, climate campaigning or anything, it isn't all just about the people doing the slow marching or whatever it might be, or the people doing the repairing at Repair Cafe. Everybody needs some good admin support. Everybody needs tea and cake. You're like, what are the things that you are good at? What are the skills that you can offer? And what is the work that needs doing to create the world that we want, and that lovely sweet spot in the middle is kind of where you want to be focusing your time and attention. And I think I've probably already banged this home enough, but I love this quote about this thing, like, so what is the biggest impact thing we can do as an individual? Actually, it's about influencing those around us to step up, to join in with us, to take action. And that, I think, also is to do with we need to throw a better party. We need to, if we're going to save the planet, we need to throw a better party than the people destroying it, because we need to make this look like it's fun and it's engaging and people are going to get something out of coming to join it. Otherwise, why would people want to join in if we tell them it's going to be bleak and austere and we're going to come for your cars and your flights and your burgers? Like, we need to think about how we can make this a joyful, connected experience for people to get involved with as well. Gone way over time, apologies. So if people want it, the invitation there is to have that climate conversation. I saw some people sharing some bits in the chat, and then maybe can you share in the chat like one other thing you're going to do as a result of this session? I don't know if there has been anything new to you, or if some of this just been a little reminder or anything like that, but I always say whenever I do any talks, like, unless people are going to go away and do anything differently as a result of it, it has essentially been a little bit of a waste of time. So we really, nothing changes if nothing changes. We really want people to be going away and doing something a little bit differently. It doesn't matter if it's imperfect, and it doesn't matter how small it is, but we'd really love to hear about that. So Claire's going to have a chat with managers at work. Emmy and Jane are going to have chats with their sisters. Ella's going to talk to her husband. Bryony's going to talk to her kids' school. Harry's going to ask his grandkids what they think about climate. Ella's going to look into hope for the future. Amazing. So keep popping those in and I will shut up. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Well, thank you, Jen. That was really good, and I didn't feel like you went on for a long time. And honestly, it was really good. It's really nice. It's very interactive, and really, I think it certainly in my case has made me think. And you're absolutely right. Public engagement is grand, but if nobody does anything as a result of it, you may as well have not bothered. So yeah, absolutely, we all need to.
I feel bad, Jane, because I didn't give you any Christmas tips, but
no, it's fine.
I can send some to you if you want them.
You talked about the Christmas cards and the jumpers and the secrets, and I think, yeah, I have to say I don't work anymore, but when I was at work, yeah, I did manage to persuade everybody at work to say, look, can we not just hand out Christmas cards and just all put £1 in the charity box instead? So I think that's another thing that you can do. Because, literally, I'm going to take that card and throw it in the bin as soon as I get home.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, recycle it. Anyone got any questions or thoughts or anything they want to share?
Alexina.
Oh, just unmute, Alexina.
Yeah, just struggling to find the button. I could you explain the climate shadow a little more?
So this is a concept. I read an article by a journalist called Emma Patty, and it's this idea that exactly as that quote, that tweet from Catherine Hayhoe, like, the narrative around individual climate action is all around reducing our footprint. Whereas there are lots of things that we can do. So the classic example would be Greta. Like, there's no, but like, if you do a carbon footprint calculator, I've never seen the box that says started a global climate movement that mobilized millions of people. Like, that has done absolutely nothing for her carbon footprint, but her climate shadow, the impact, the influence that it has had is enormous. So this is all of those things that we do that there isn't a tick box for on a climate, on a carbon footprint calculator, the conversations that we have. And she also talks about the fact that it includes these like contagious behaviors. So again, there's a growing body of evidence around things like solar panels being a contagious behavior. So apparently there was some research that found that the biggest predictor of whether you'll have solar panels on your house is how many of the surrounding houses have it. And I guess we can understand that, because if you see like Bob down the road get solar panels and you go, oh, Bob, that's amazing. Like, how much were they, and who did you get, and were you happy with them, and how's it working out? Like, you can understand why that happens. The other one that she talks about is reducing flying. So there's a guy called Steve Westlake who did his PhD at Cardiff, and his PhD was into like, does it matter if our leaders are seen to be taking climate action? And spoiler alert, yes, it does. But he did some research during his PhD that looked at people who had given up flying for climate reasons, and found that 50% of the people in their immediate circle had also reduced flying because of that one person who had given up flying and talked about it. So, it's not only doing these things, it's talking about them, as I said, sharing those co-benefits, encouraging other people to come on board. That's the idea of the climate shadow, and we talk about it. Claire's in my membership community, and we talk about it quite a lot in there, because sometimes I think if you've been doing this stuff for a while, you can reach a point where you're like, I've done everything that is within my power to do to reduce my carbon footprint, you know, because the next things are the really big investment stuff or whatever. And then you can feel a bit like, oh, what do I do now? And it's like, well, okay, let's look at how can we grow your climate shadow? And the great thing about a lot of those climate shadow things is they're free, most of them. They don't cost us anything. We can, you know, we can all have more conversations. So yeah, I just love that concept. And I think
I'd heard of it as the carbon handprint as well.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's because I've shared it on social media before and had a few people go, I don't like shadow. And I'm like, all right, pick another word.
I mean, it has got slight negative connotations, the shadow, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I have seen on various business impact reports that they've produced, they'll do a carbon footprint and then they'll do a carbon handprint, which is showing the kind of the positives that they've done.
Yeah, and that's
quite nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. Anyone else? Any questions? Oh, yours are on the back of your house, are they? that balance between getting the maximum sun and having the you could put on the front solar panels over here and a little sign. Go for it, Mick.
I was just wondering, that quiz you did with sort of what has the most impact and what the public think has the most impact, is that your quiz or is there something?
No, so well, I made it into a quiz, but it's based off Ipsos. If you Google Ipsos, IPSOS, and then perils of perception, it's a study that I think they do it every year, and it's just asking people, you know, getting a feel, I guess, for what the public's perception is of what are impactful actions. So yeah, Ipsos perils of perception.
It just sounds like you could share that on social media quite a bit, and
yeah. I do it as well in so I do that quiz sometimes in carbon literacy, and also, like, you know, in person, like I've got some cards printed out and just asking, because I did a talk for an organization, a couple of talks for an organization, and it was part of a sort of a climate day they were doing, and they wanted me to have a stall, and I was like, oh, well, I don't really know what to put on a stall. So I had that game, and, you know, people would be wandering past, and then I go, oh, do you want to have a go at this? And then they'd come in, and because they wouldn't feel too under pressure to just be moving cards around, and then you can have a really nice conversation. And I do it like with ranking foods for their carbon footprint and energy saving measures and things, and that can be quite a nice gentle way of sort of drawing people in. And then having a conversation about, you know, and they're sort of learning themselves without feeling like they're stupid, do you know? So it can be quite a nice nice one to do. Emmy, you've got your hand up.
Yes, yeah, just on this perils of perception, I guess I was interested in where that sort of the wrong perceptions come from. Obviously, I am a bit of a conspiracy theorist, and I suppose just wondering whether it really is a reflection of the wider messages that are, if you like, a lot of stuff suppressed by the media and the right-wing media and the bigger systems, and or whether there is also an unconscious bias towards, you know, saying the things that people would prefer to do, you know, like recycling. It looked like the easier stuff. So
definitely. And I think I'd never really thought about it as a, you know, a sort of right-wing sort of suppression of information. I think it's my perception of it is that, like, recycling and waste and plastic is an understandable because, like, it's visible, we can see it, and we can see the rubbish, and we can see the recycling, and we feel like we're good people because we're doing our recycling's also become a social norm. Like, it has reached that tipping point. It is completely the normal thing for us to do, and, you know, and I think very much the information that we were being given in the 90s and the 2000s was like, this is all you can do really as a good green person, is do your recycling. And maybe that was a lack of understanding then from the powers that be in terms of, you know, what are the bigger actions, or maybe thinking people aren't ready for those bigger actions. There will be uproar if we tell people that, you know, and I think that's part of it now, is that you know, certainly with the Tory government seeming to want to turn this into a real kind of wedge culture issue, and this perception that we will be telling people they can't fly, they can't have burgers, they can't. Well, no, we're not telling them that. We're telling them that these are the things that you can do that will have a really positive impact. Oh, and by the way, if you do these things, you'll reduce your risk of heart attack, you will be healthier, we will have cleaner air, you know. And I think we need to get much better at selling those co-benefits than just sort of finger wagging and telling people they can't do stuff, because no one's going to go for that. But yeah, I think the plastic and the recycling, because it's so visible, whereas one of the issues we've got with emissions and carbon is it's invisible. And so that's where sometimes, you know, there is a use for carbon footprints to enable us to have something tangible and measurable that we can look at. I'm aware that you guys have got a proper meeting to have to squeeze into like 15 minutes. But
it's not important. It's not important. Rupert Knowles.
Go on, Rupert.
Yeah, sorry I was late. I fell asleep, to be honest. I was so comfortable in front of the fire.
Oh, I'm very jealous.
But anyway, what do you feel about the things that are going to cost us a lot of money, like doing our houses and other ways of getting around by train, for example, is so expensive? How are we going to deal with those and persuade people that those are the things to do?
Like, I guess those... there is a frustrating perception that, you know, living more sustainably costs us more money, and there are things that will cost us more money, like you just said, like train transport, like refurbing our homes, solar panels, all those sorts of things. At the crux of, you know, living more sustainably is consuming less, whether that's energy, food, clothes, whatever that is. So all of those things will save us money. So sometimes there might be a balancing out to be done, you know, in terms of this thing might cost us a little bit more money, but this will save us some money here. However, you know, those things that you mentioned, like the train and the insulating and things, they really need government policy shifts. You know, they need the government to be subsidizing retrofitting and to have a massive campaign across the country to enable us to do that. I think if we are in a position where you know, where we are able to afford to do these things, doing them hopefully means that it helps bring the price down for other people. So that can be a really helpful thing to do if we are in a position to do that. But again, with transport, you know, we need a massive policy shift from government, and they've done it really well in lots of countries in mainland Europe. So Germany, I think, have introduced like a €49 per month fee for a train ticket. That means that you can use any of the sort of local trains. I don't think you can go right across country, but you can get a long way on trains just for €49 per month. I think Spain did something similar post-COVID. So, you know, this is where we as individuals, I guess, need to come together to lobby our government for the changes that we need. So, but I think if we're looking at it from a sort of societal level, the cost of action that we need to take now to halve emissions is far outweighed by the cost of inaction. The longer we wait, the more expensive this is going to be, not only in terms of implementing the changes that we need, but in terms of dealing with the impacts that we then see, the worsening impacts of the climate crisis. So, you know, from a government perspective, you know, if Rishi Sunak really was looking for the long-term prosperity of the country, it is about making some more difficult short to medium-term decisions, but that will, you know, have a massive payoff a little bit further on down the road. Unfortunately, that doesn't fit with our 5-year election cycle for our politicians who are just interested in getting voted in next time. That was a very long-winded answer.
No, I think it's a really good point, isn't it? There are things that as individuals we can't do, but that's why we have to use our voices, just to ask for it from people who can do it.
Yeah,
definitely. Does anybody else have any other questions? Lee?
Can I just ask if you have a view, Jen, on home heating? Because most people have gas, some people have wood burning, neither of which are good for the climate. Do you have a view on which should be?
Yeah, I think we need to be transitioning towards air source heat pumps. It's been done very well in Scandinavian countries. I don't know why I was looking at it earlier on for something, but like Norway and Finland are absolutely like leading the charge on this. So, you know, it can be done in cold countries, in countries that are much colder than ours. I think hydrogen is probably a bit for home heating is probably a bit of a dead end, a bit of a red herring. I think hydrogen will have a role to play within the energy transition, but I think it will probably be for like construction and, you know, like massive big diggers and all that sort of thing, and maybe for aviation. But yeah, I think air source heat pumps. I mean, the wood burner, like, I'm so gutted. Like, I love our log burner, but I just cannot in all good conscience, I think, continue to use it with all the you know, research coming out about not only outdoor air pollution but indoor air pollution, and then the costs to health as well. So yeah, but also I think, you know, we need to be mindful that there are people who maybe their wood burner is their only source of heating, and so obviously that's, you know, you need to carry on having a warm home. It's those of us who are like me, middle class idiots who just thought it was a lovely thing to do and it made them feel nice and toasty warm. Like, I need to be making some different decisions about what I'm doing when I've got perfectly functional gas central heating that I need to replace with an air source heat pump. Did that answer your question, Lou?
Yes, thank you. I mean, it's obviously the problem with air source heat pumps is it's for retrofitting. It's not so easy. It's for new homes. It's a clear way forward, but for existing houses it's much more difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, again, I'm not an expert, so you know, it would probably be useful to have somebody come in who was an expert, who understood it. But I think you know, this idea that our homes need to be insulated to the nth degree before an air source heat pump is going to work, like, yes, they will work much more efficiently the more insulated your home is, but that doesn't mean that they won't work at all if you don't have a, you know, a really highly insulated property. So but I think it is all about getting somebody, you know, a reputable company come in who know what they're doing, who understand the different things that need to be made, the different changes that need to be made, so they can advise you properly. I think there is, unfortunately, you know, going to be some cowboys who are in it to make a quick buck and to take advantage of the government schemes and things like that. So yeah, it is a tricky one, isn't it?
Okay, thank you.
I think you had your hand up next.
Sorry, did you say me, Claire?
Yeah, go. Yeah.
Yeah, I find one of the most difficult conversations to have is really about the use of cars and the kind of individual freedom focus which we've been used to since, you know, cars were readily available to all of us, versus, you know, the idea of being able to share systems, public transport systems. And and there are so many kind of angles to this, you know, whether it's the 20-mile-an-hour zone, whether we talk about air quality, congestion, the waste of time in traffic jams, which are all kind of factors which we would not need to experience if there were good public transport systems where we didn't waste time, where we could rely on them. And it just seems to be such an enormous attitude shift that's needed. And, you know, obviously a lot of people understand that, but it really does need pressure on the government to actually change that kind of perception. And the argument of the EVs are going to solve that, they're not, because obviously of the cost issue. And, you know, the technology is not absolutely 100% certain because of issues of them catching fire.
I'll just gently challenge you on that one. The research shows that diesel and petrol cars are, I can't remember what time, but a factor more likely than to catch fire.
I'm just kind of arguing against the focus on EVs as being the solution to you know, the carbon footprint of transport. So that, you know, I don't know whether you have any kind of ideas or have had discussions
I mean, again,
about changing attitudes.
That needs, you know, Rishi Sunak is not helping with his war on motorists. You know what I mean? Like, so it is really difficult. And I think maybe if the focus of the conversation is around air pollution and health rather than climate, whether that would get more people on board, because some people, you know, have been polarized by some of the rhetoric that's coming out. So actually, if we talk about children's health around schools and all those sorts of things, maybe that feels less contentious for people. And do you know that even if climate change wasn't a problem, wouldn't it be sensible to transition away from petrol and diesel cars because of all the benefits that we'd get in terms of air pollution? And, you know, in terms of public transport and active travel and all those sorts of things, again, I think they need government policy shifts, and because it's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing. You can't tell people to take public transport and give up their car when the public transport is absolutely appalling and there's one bus a day from their village. Do you know, like, or if people don't feel safe cycling. But there's been some, you know, again, like looking to mainland Europe, like Paris is making great strides to becoming a car-free city. Even in London, actually, I think I read something that they'd reached a tipping point during the sort of morning rush hour where there were more bikes than cars on the roads. Like, these things can happen and can happen relatively quickly. If you look at Amsterdam, like Amsterdam has not always been like that. It happened in the 70s and 80s as a result of a campaign by mums who were concerned about road safety for their children. So these things can change and can change quite quickly. But you know, in terms of, I guess, immediate stuff you could do, is it a case of, you know, having conversations with local schools around car-free zones at drop-off and pick-up? Is it about getting them excited about having a walking bus going into school or a cycling bus? Or, you know, there's a brilliant, I always give the example in carbon literacy training of if anyone's on Twitter, or actually you can just Google, they've got a website, Shoreland's Bike Bus in Glasgow. And it's just, I think it's every Friday, they have this bike bus of kids cycling into school. And it's just the most joyous thing, like 300 kids, all the volunteers, the adults there helping them, ringing their bells. Like, it just looks like the most fun thing. And so if we can actually start to, you know, get people on board with the idea that like cycling and walking is more fun than being driven by your parents in a car, like that's maybe when we start to move towards some of these shifts. Rupert.
Yes, on the car issue, there was a thing I think in the papers today or the day before about SUVs. People buying electric cars are buying huge electric cars, and do they really need them? Because the weight of the battery, etc., is actually causing a far greater carbon footprint than you would think. But we do have to go electric. That's the main thing. And I was also, well, Harry and the others know, we've got this carbon toolkit, came from Oxford, I think it was, or somewhere, which is brilliant about your homes, where do heat pumps fit in, what to do with this, that, and the other. And so I think that's something we're going to follow. But one of the things it does point out that I hadn't really cottoned on to is that electricity is going to be down to net zero very soon with renewables. And when it becomes net zero, then it doesn't matter quite so much how much of it you use. I mean, it's a question of budget, but you're not actually consuming more fossil fuel by using net zero electricity. So it makes sense to make your house as electric as possible.
Oh, yeah.
And if necessary, if you don't want a heat pump, just get an electric radiator in instead. It's going to cost you more, but the carbon footprint will be much lower than a gas boiler.
Yeah, I think we're at about everything I've read about 50% renewables for electricity generation in the UK grid at the moment. And you know, when we reach zero carbon, I'm not entirely sure. The kind of it doesn't matter how much we use argument is like Mike Berners-Lee. I don't know if people have read his book. I don't know if I've got it to hand. How Bad Are Bananas? He talks a little bit about this. He talks about, you know, the fact that we now use energy for everything. Like I've got a podcast coming out tomorrow about like the internet, and like, you know, instead of using a map, we use our phones. Instead of like I don't know, just listening to the radio, we look on our weather app. Like everything has become electrified, and that energy, it's not only the energy that we're using at home as sort of as end users, it all like is lost along the way as well. So, you know, we might be using 4 units of energy at home, and that might have actually been 16 units of energy that were produced at the power station. So I think we do need to be careful that we don't, you know, because even if it's technically net zero, it all has an impact in terms of the embodied carbon of the infrastructure and the panels and the wind turbines and all that sort of thing. So I think that we need to be careful that we don't sort of go, oh, it's renewable energy, let's go absolutely nuts for it.
Well, I think what you're talking about there is consumption, isn't it? We have to cut down consumption, and that, you know, talk about embodied carbon and things in the consumption there. But even so, I think electricity does seem to be the way to go, particularly if you can get your own solar panels up and your own battery.
Oh yeah.
You can become carbon neutral at home and charge everything up, and it's not costing anybody anything.
Oh yeah, we need to basically electrify everything.
I think so. Although I was always a bit reluctant to do so, because I like to have more than one option. You know, if there's an electricity cut, you know, I'd rather be able to have some gas or light a fire somewhere. And so,
interestingly, in the States, where they apparently have quite a few issues with their grid, and they're quite frequently have like power cuts and blackouts that, you know, don't just last 5 minutes, that last for sort of several days, especially more rurally. There's a real interest in there in talking about electric vehicles, the idea of having like vehicle, because there is at the moment it all goes grid to vehicle. There is the technology to go vehicle to grid, so to be able to, you know, at times of high demand, to drain car batteries and put it back into the grid. But there's also the option of doing vehicle to house. So it's apparently a real interest for people in some parts of the States to be able to have, you know, their car sat there charged up on the drive, and then when they have a power cut, they can just plug the car in and be able to maybe not carry on as normal, but actually have some power into their home from the car that sat on their drive. And I just think that's just amazing, isn't it?
well, I think Octopus Energy are pushing that, aren't they?
Yes,
I think they're starting schemes where your car can plug into your house, and by charging it up at the right time and then taking from it in the early evening when there's peak demand. You can use it as an extra storage battery, basically.
Yeah, it's going to be one of the ways I think we balance out the peaks in the grid. Yeah, definitely.
It's going to cost us money, but we've got to do it.
It's all going to cost us money. If we do nothing, it's going to cost us money. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. Unless anybody's got any absolutely burning questions they really can't let go of, I'm going to wrap it up there, because we've been very greedy of your time, Jen.
Oh, don't worry.
You've spoken to us for well over an hour, and that's been really, really interesting, and it's been a really stimulating discussion. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. I will leave you to get on with the rest of your
meeting. Thank you. I shall talk really quickly for another minute and a half.
Brilliant. You, Thanks so much. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I really don't have a huge amount else to say. You may be happy to hear. So, as I mentioned right at the start, but there was a few people that weren't around. So just to say, we don't have a meeting in December, because it would be a few days before Christmas, and I feel like that's probably the last thing people want to do. So our next meeting will be on whatever the third Thursday is in January. We have got what would that be? It's the 18th of January. We've already got speakers lined up for a number of meetings early next year. To pick up on the theme of carbon literacy that Jen mentioned, our January meeting, we've got a couple of people from a group called Green Welford who will give us an overview of carbon literacy training, give us a very compressed, sort of tiny carbon literacy course, which I hope will be interesting to everybody. In February, we've got Alison Holland from Brightways in North Northamptonshire on sustainable travel, which I think should be really interesting. And March, we've got our own Jonathan Harris, who's on the Corn Steering Group, and also West Northampton councillor, will talk to us about UK 100, because he's been on a UK 100 course as part of his council duty. So I think that will be very interesting. For those that don't know, UK 100 is an organisation which brings together councils from across the UK that have committed to achieving net zero. And in April, Emmy has very kindly volunteered to give us a talk on climate psychology and climate distress. So I think that will something that will be of value to everyone. Yeah, hopefully some really good stuff lined up for next year, but we are going to give you a break for a month. And then just a couple of events coming up locally that I just wanted to mention. So on Saturday at Southcourt Environmental, they have got a family-friendly workshop on starting a wormery, which sounds really interesting. Love worms, they're great. The details that are all on the Corn Exchange What's On page, so sort of how to get there, what time, and all that kind of thing. The local council in Wootton are doing a big tree planting event on the 28th of October. I don't have full information about that, but if anybody's interested, I will put details up on the What's On as soon as they're available. They're looking for people to go and dig some holes and help with the planting. And the final full West Northampton Council meeting of the year will be on the 30th of November. There may well be somebody from Corn there speaking to the council, but there will I believe that the 1000 Voices campaign in Northampton, who are campaigning for better air quality for the council, to do more about air quality, are planning another demonstration there at the same time as well. So that was everything I wanted to gallop through at the end of the meeting. Thank you so much all for coming. Does anybody have anything else that they want to mention? We're a mere 2 minutes over time, so we can spare another minute or two if there's anything anybody else wants to say. Right, I'll take that as a no. Thank you all very much. I'm sure I will see some of you before the end of the year, but if I don't, enjoy the holiday season in whatever fashion you choose. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. See you, everyone. Bye.
Bye all. Bye all.